Welcome to Dig Deep, the mining podcast. In this podcast, we go deep into mining news, hot topics, and live interviews with mining professionals and leading figures in the mining industry. Introducing your host, Rob Tyson, founder and director of Mining International and Mining International Executive, a leading global mining recruitment and headhunting agency.
Hi mining community, welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the mining podcast. And today's guest is Justin Walls, who's the principal consultant specialising in tailings and mine closures for SRK Consulting in Australia, who are a global firm that provides technical services for mining and exploration projects globally. Justin is going to discuss looking at proactive tailing closures and why balancing compliance, reducing liabilities and adding value through strategic planning is important and why companies should take note. I want to give a shout out to our sponsors, Hawcroft, who are leaders in property risk management in the mining industry since 1992. They offer insurance risk surveys, construction risk reviews and asset criticality assessments and more. Working across 600 sites globally, Hawcroft supports all areas of mining and mineral extraction. So if you're looking for any property and insurance risk management services, then please visit their website at www.hawcroft.com. All the details are in the show notes. Justin, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Thanks very much, Rob. Great to be here. I'm doing well, thanks.
Good. Thank you for obviously approaching myself and asking to come on the podcast. Well, first of all, just wondering if you can just tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your career. As I mentioned in the introduction, you specialise in tailings and mine closures. So I just wondered if you can just let the audience know a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your career.
Yeah, sounds a good place to start, Rob. I studied civil engineering at the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. But as part of that, I specialised in or chose to do the environmental engineering branch of civil engineering. And when I needed to do vacation work as part of my studies, I reached out to an extended family connection. And he was working at a company that had environmental engineers in the title. So that's a good place to start. I did vacation work there and learned about tailings. That's mainly what they did. And from studying, I ended up working there. During that time, I designed and built 4 tailings dams across a few countries. But I felt like I wanted to get a bit closer to the environmental engineering side of it all. So I sort of took a bit of a sidestep into the closure side of tailings dams. So I went from making the mess to tidying up the mess. So I see myself as a bit of a recovering tailings engineer at this point in time.
Got you. And I imagine most of our audience know SRK. So I just wondering if you just give us a brief snapshot of what SRK do and maybe your particular division as well.
Yep. SRK is a global company. Started in South Africa. There are a number of offices all around the world that mainly focus on the minery advisory side of things and all aspects linked to mining, back early exploration, permitting side, all the way through to the actual mining, the geotech, the tailings, the groundwater, pretty much all the sciences involved with mining, right through operating the mine and then closing it down at the end.
Yeah. I wonder if you can just explain what, obviously, and again, most of our audience may know this, but some may not. Explain what tailings storage facility closure designing obviously involves, and why is it an essential part of a mining operation?
Sure. So as many may know, tailings is effectively the waste product that comes out of the mine's processing plant. It can come out in a lot of different forms. It could be a slurry, it could be as thick as a paste, potentially almost a dry product. I put dry in inverted commas. That's a separate discussion in terms of filter presses and the likes. So if it typically comes out as hydraulically and placed hydraulically into a sort of containment facility, some kind of dam, These are often called tailings dams or tailings storage facilities, and these exist to store all the waste because only a very small percentage of what comes out from underground converts into the actual product that's being aimed for, the commodity there. And these large mud structures then need to be stable enough and during the operational life to accept what they need to accept. And then, but it doesn't just have to last the duration of the mine's life, the mine's operational life. It needs to last effectively indefinitely, or at least long enough that it's not going to have any major detrimental impacts. In some cases, the facilities get remined, reprocessed, and sent to a centralized facility or back into a pit or underground. In other cases, the tailings dams need to continue to exist as true long-term engineered landforms there. So it's quite important that they're done responsibly, proactively, and with a long-term view in mind to make sure that they are appropriately closed and exist in the right form.
When is it the right time for a mining company to actually start thinking about closure designs for their tailings storage facilities?
Well, as many would expect, and as most people give you the answer, when should a particular specialist or person be involved? The answer you're usually going to get is it's never too early. In reality, it's a bit late to start thinking about closure right at the end. Oh, well, we're about to turn off the pumps. We're about to turn off the pipes. What should we do now? I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen, but it would be a lot easier and reduce your liability quite a lot if you did it earlier on. Now, with the advent of the Global Industry Standard on Tailings Management, or the GISTM, it's brought a lot of proactive thinking into tailings planning and management operations. And as part of that, with the conformance protocols in support of the GISTM, the conformance protocols recommend that you have a pre-feasibility level closure design by the time you have a detailed set of hard copy drawings, or as a colleague quipped once, in the cloud. It's not really hard copies as much anymore. So by the time you say we know exactly how we're going to build it, you should at least have a reasonable idea as to how you're going to close it for it.
And do you think a lot of companies don't put too much emphasis on that that kind of design, obviously when they're building it?
I think that's a tricky question that's hard to generalize. I would say that a lot of the companies, especially the larger ones, are more responsible, more proactive, plan ahead, realize that they're in it for the long term. They're not just looking till the end of necessarily to the end of the ore body. And another thinking is that if mining companies don't do it properly, the one choice is you go bankrupt and disappear. And the other one is if you don't do it properly, you're going to end up as long-term land management companies. So if you think of some of the blue chip clients that will have maybe 100 tailings dams across the world, if they don't do it properly, they're in for quite a long-term liability, which understandably or expectedly would have quite a large number attached to it. So I think that it's evolved. The earlier part of my career, the closure thinking for tailings dams is, well, let's vegetate it, let's flatten the slopes a bit. We'll get there. That's good enough. But now it's a lot more proactive, a lot more advanced. So I would say a lot of the mining companies are doing a lot better with closure planning and the closure designs associated with the waste facilities.
What are compliance and conformance, such as obviously meeting the GISTM standards, so critical for mining companies when designing and closing tailings storage facilities?
So the complying with legislation should be seen as a non-negotiable aspect. However, legislation is typically a reactive entity and really typically only comes into existence after something bad has happened. Oh dear, the oil has spilled or whatever, we must prevent the oil from spilling. type thing. Let's put a law in place. So it's legislation in most areas is generally lagging a little bit and only just staying ahead of where the real problems lie. So these days you get a lot more guidelines and standards out there, and like the GISTM, other ones that they call themselves best practice or good practice guidelines, and they look to push the envelope just that little bit further, doing better than the legal requirements. Now, typically, if you're only staying just ahead of legislation by complying, there's always a chance that legislation gets more stringent, and then suddenly you are caught behind. Even though you were compliant, you are no longer compliant with the stricter legislation. So if you can stay ahead of the curve as such, or at least stay on the curve with good practice guidelines, you've got a bit of a buffer in there. And while not necessarily all of it has tested systems around it, it's looking to share knowledge and do better than before. And in my opinion, and I think most people are on a similar boat, if you're an investor, you're more likely to choose the responsible mining company that's looking to do more than just the bare minimum. And that's probably where you're more likely to put your money, especially with those that are following good public disclosure practices like the GISTM calls for.
What practical steps can mining companies take to reduce its liabilities and manage closure costs obviously more effectively?
We feel that a large part comes down to planning far enough ahead and planning to an appropriate level, trying to plan concurrently with foreclosure while you're operating goes a long way in the final closure there. So instead of doing 100% at the end when you've got zero cash flow and no time to check how it's working, or at least not the workforce available to check if it's working, it's a much riskier approach than doing it as early as possible, as much as possible. A lot of jurisdictions call for the mine to set aside some kind of financial provision or have some kind of guarantee in place in the event that the mining company has to close, so that guarantee can be put in place or realized to close the mine properly. Now, if you are not planning on doing any closure or rehabilitation work during the life of the mine or the facility, it's a big number that you have to have set aside there. But if you do it proactively, concurrently, you don't have to set aside as much money there. So if generally, then you end up with something that's greener or more sustainable, or at least more appealing to the local communities. It can help reduce your social liability in terms of engaging with the right people at the right time, the goodwill of the community, the local community, the regional communities, and then the bigger picture in terms of if you look to minimize long-term, say, groundwater seepage, that reduces your environmental liability in terms of the groundwater pollution plume. So if you've done it properly early on, you've got less to clean up later.
Can you share some examples of your global sort of experience of what makes a TSF closure project more successful, and maybe highlight lessons learned from closures that I suppose didn't go as planned?
Again, that's quite an open question for it, and there might be different opinions on the good, the bad, the ugly there. Typically, planning early works well. I was involved in a project where even though the facility and the mines had quite a life behind it already, a few decades, they still got a few decades to go. So they commissioned a study during the life of the tailings dam, sort of close to the middle of the life of the facility, and said, well, what does this need to look like going forward to see us through and to be responsible for the facility to the end? And a lot of studies were done around how you're going to decant water and the stability and the likes. And one of them was the closure study. And that allowed us to come up with some ideas for what closure could look like, what they could use it for, and potentially make some tweaks to the operations. Now, if you make minor tweaks to the operations, that's a lot easier to stomach than a massive cost at the end. And for that particular facility, they would have needed millions of cubic meters of fill if they wanted to import it to allow the facility to be free draining from the top. But instead, we showed that it could be done by modifying the deposition during the final years of operation. Then effectively, you haven't really changed much from operational cost perspective, but you've gone with something that resembles a very large bathtub to something that's a much shallower bathtub, so it's a lot easier to do things down the line. So I think that was a really nice project to be involved in. It showed the very proactive nature of it, that the client was willing to consider things early and not be reactive at the end. Oops, should have done that 2 decades ago. Closures that didn't go according to plan, well, there are a few of them around the world, and they often relate to either pollution, often groundwater pollution, or surface water pollution. They're those that the communities are left behind, feeling like the mines didn't consider them. They sort of locked the fences and locked the gates and left. So if you can integrate the communities and the planning and what the community would like to use the mine or the tailings dams for early on, you can work towards that, ideally with something more like a land use that benefits them, growing biofuels or solar panels or whatever the case is. So unfortunately, there are more examples of mines not doing that than those that did do that. So unfortunately, there is a bit of a lengthy list that could be shown in terms of the bad and the ugly side of mine closure.
When planning a tailings storage facility closure, how can collaboration with stakeholders, obviously such as traditional owners, regulators, local communities, help improve the outcome?
We found that engaging people early on always helps in the planning. It might not be a quick planning process, but it's better to rather delay that portion by weeks or months than at the end when you want to now start implementing, and then you've got a lot more to do and a lot more to catch up on. So if you're able to engage with the correct people, the correct stakeholders around the table, whether that's the community directly outside the mine, the regulators, or the regional areas, whatever the case is, you're able to learn from them. Now, whether that's their experiences in the area, understand their expectations, and with the end goal of reaching agreement on what does relinquishment look like. What are those relinquishment criteria that you are aiming for? Because if you can agree on where you're all going, then it's a lot easier to put a plan in place and know when you're there. So if it's a case of setting up some kind of industry there, aquaculture, whatever the case is, and the local communities and traditional owners say, yep, that's great, that's what we'd like to see, that'll help us, that'll improve the quality of our lives when we no longer have an income from mining, then you all work towards that. It also helps improve the stewardship aspect of that down the line, so that the local community wants to look after it because they get benefit out of it, instead of saying, no, they've left this polluting mess, don't want to touch it. It's all bad memories and hatred there. And with the regulators, there are certain pieces of legislation in place, and there can be different interpretations of that. You say, well, we feel if we do X, Y, Z, we will meet your requirements. The regulator says, well, maybe, but we won't accept that, or we'll only accept that if you also monitor a particular parameter, or you also do this, or you can also demonstrate that. And if you put those in place early, then you can either work directly towards it, or more likely, as you go along, adjust the plan, update the plan as you go, and hopefully keep everybody talking around the same table and on the same side.
And finally, what do you say to mining companies that are hesitating to obviously prioritise their tailings storage facility closure planning for their operations?
Closure planning and closure design of TSFs shouldn't only be about compliance. Ideally, it's an opportunity. It's a proactive way to reduce the future liabilities. It ensures financial efficiency. If you're really looking to do your best, you can look to leave a positive legacy there, which I feel like mining companies generally are at least considering. On the flip side of the coin, if you neglect the closure planning, and then it only increases your risks down the line, especially when you don't put plans in place, investigations in place, the studies in place. You don't know what's there or how bad it perhaps is. In the one example we worked on, the mine would require quite a large buttress, and it was an underground mine, so they didn't have much rock stockpiled around. So for them to properly close the facility, they'd need to import quite a lot of rock. Now they're going to have to look at other ways to minimize that volume there, or improve the stability of the long-term stability of the facility. So I would encourage that mining companies look to plan as far ahead as possible. Look to find look to others for support, learn from the industry. There's some good closure conferences around. Look for the innovative solutions, share what works, also share what doesn't work for it. And if you can find experienced partners like we've partnered with mining houses, we feel it can go a long way and really reduce the liabilities and make it very much more cost effective down the line.
Justin, thank you for sharing your story and sharing your knowledge around tailings storage facilities and mine closure. And I think from what you're saying is really anyone that's involved in mining, whether you're at the early stage, whether you're in operation, it's something to think about no matter what stage you are at during the mining life cycle. And I suppose it's better to prepare than not to prepare. So if our audience wants to reach out to you, if they want to follow some of your work or get in contact to maybe provide some advice, how can they go about doing that, and what social media platform channels are you on and SRK?
Yeah, definitely always happy to chat, explore ideas. You can go to our SRK website. We've srk.com. We show all our global consultants there and have more details into the case studies we've got. We've got a very active LinkedIn page that promotes what we're doing, where we are, things we're working on. People are welcome to reach out to me on my personal LinkedIn page, or drop me an email, juwalls@srk.com.au.
Yeah, great. We'll include these all in the show notes to come this episode for our audience for easy access to contact you. So thank you very much for sharing your information. I like guests coming on and speaking a little bit more technical and for instance around a particular subject that's probably more important to our industry than people take credit for. So thank you for sharing your story and wish you well in your work.
Great. Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed that episode. As I just mentioned, it was more of a technical episode, and I know our audience like these technical content, and it's something that's obviously important to our industry, and maybe not people don't give necessarily credit for closing down of a mine, but as Justin's alluded to, it's something that you need to think about no matter what stage you are in the mining life cycle, whether you're just starting out designing a mine or whether you're in operation, as opposed to when it's just closing. So appreciate if you can share this episode far and wide around the world, and thank you for listening, and until next time, happy mining.
Thank you for listening. Remember to reach out to Rob via the show notes and be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, happy mining, helping each other to improve the mining industry.